We are on this series called The History of Christmas. Full disclosure, not having service last week hurt because I'm kind of boxed into this Christmas message and I'm running out of time. So we're going to be covering 350 years of human history in 30 minutes. So pack a lunch, put on a hard hat. We got work to do, all right? So the history of Christmas, what we're focusing on is this one verse or verses, this one portion of Scripture that really sums up what we're talking about. It's Galatians 4:4, and it says, "But when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth His Son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law, so that we might receive adoption as sons." And so it's this phrase, "in the fullness of time." And what we're talking about in particular is what they call the intertestamental period, which is between the Old Testament and the New Testament. So you have the book of Malachi, which is named after the prophet Malachi, which is the final book of the Old Testament. And then you turn one page or maybe two pages if you have a fancy Bible. And then you're at Matthew's book, which is the first book of the New Testament. But between that, 400 years of human history went by, and a lot of major things happened. Now, they call it the silent period, or the 400 years of silence, because they didn't hear from God. So for the first time in human history, we haven't heard from God, either God Himself, an angel of the Lord, an angel, a burning bush, a prophet. Some way they've always heard from God, and now for the first time in human history, radio silence. Imagine what that would be like. And though God was silent during these 400 years, He was not inactive. And you and I, what does it have to do with our lives? Is because we need to realize during those times where we're praying prayers that never get answered and it feels like God is silent, He's never inactive. And we're going to look at how God was behind the scenes orchestrating human history for the perfect fullness of time for the Messiah. Let me show you the timeline from 2 weeks ago. And before this makes you get a headache and panic, what we're really looking at is this idea of the prophetic silence. And this is a list of all of the things that happened during those 400 years. Now, some of this stuff we'll go into maybe some other year or some other time, but the book of the Old Testament ends with Persian rule. So Persia defeats the Babylonians. And I used to be a history teacher. One of my students once called the Babylonian Empire, he called it Baby Lion instead of Babylonian. And I made the mistake of laughing, because when you laugh when a young person does something stupid, they do it over and over again. So for the rest of the semester, it was the Baby Lion Empire. Some of you will never see that again any other way. And the Persians take over, and that's kind of what happens at the beginning of their empire when the Old Testament ends. But what we're covering is the next two, which is the Hellenistic Empire and the Roman Empire. And that's really what we are going to be covering this week. And it's going to be a lot. But here's what I want to show you, is I want to show you that you may decide that you don't believe in the miraculous parts of the Bible, but even an atheist cannot argue with the historical accuracy. And here's what I also want us to see, is that all of these major things were going on, and you and I are going to have to decide, do we believe that a God that is sovereign, that sees the end from the beginning and can orchestrate all of this according to His plan, a God that is holding you and I floating on a rock in space, spinning while spinning around a giant fireball at just the perfect tilt, at just the perfect speed that you and I can go to sleep tonight and not even think about it? Does that same God that can handle all of this, can He handle your problem of what you're facing right now? Because we think, God, you can do all of this, but this thing that I'm facing right now, there's nothing you can do about it. This ache that I feel in my heart, there's nothing you can do about it. And you're going to have to come to a decision at some point in time, is, do we believe that God is who He says He is, or do we not? So we're going to go through the Hellenistic Empire, the second empire of the intertestamental period. And before we can talk about Hellenism, we have to go back a little bit and talk about a dude by the name of Philip II. Philip II. Here is a picture of what Philip looked like. And if you're here with your spouse, your husband just got a lot prettier. This is Philip II of Macedonia. There's a couple of reasons why you need to know him and why he's important to biblical history. The foremost is that his offspring is going to be named Alexander, who history will know as Alexander the Great, and I'm going to tell you that I believe that Alexander the Great did more for the spreading of Christianity than any non-believer in human history. Prove me wrong. Now, you may be wondering what on earth happened to his face right there. Legend has it that in the middle of a battle, he took an arrow to the eye. Think about a pencil and an apple. It makes that noise. And in the and then if you laughed, what is wrong with you? Why am I laughing? And in the middle of the battle, he breaks the arrow in half, rips a shirt off of a dude, and wraps it around his eye until they win the battle. That, ladies and gentlemen, is a man. Like, I could turn my ankle right now while preaching, and I'm taking the rest of the service off. This is a man. And Philip II was able to take all of the different little city-states, and he was able to unite all of them. Some of it was persuasion. He said, hey, each of us are battling the Persian army by ourselves and each other, and if we went under the same umbrella, like, we could do some stuff. And then some of them was persuasion by a sword in your throat, and then you say, yes, sir, no problem, whatever. And what Philip II did, though, is he created this army that was so counterintuitive to what the rest of the world did. So at the time, you wanted the biggest, baddest, most brutal army. And that works. Nothing wrong with that. Speak softly and carry a big stick. But the problem is, if you got this big, giant army, they're not really good soldiers. And the bigger the army, the longer it takes to get somewhere. And so if you got this big, giant army and you're moving towards, I don't know why I'm walking like this, but you're moving towards wherever you're attacking, like, they see you coming. It just takes a while to get there. How many of you have like 4+ kids? It takes you a while to get to places, right? And then those people that don't have kids, they can just go wherever they want, whenever they want. Like, go to sleep whenever they want to go to sleep. Like, it's wild to me. That's not in my notes. But he would bring this big army, and Philip II said, what if I took a smaller army, a leaner army, actually trained them to be good soldiers, and then we could move quicker than anybody's ever seen an army. Before you even have time to prepare, we're already at your doorstep. See, the big old army that takes time, that also means that wherever you're attacking, they have time to set up a counterattack and a defense. So Philip II actually trained his soldiers and moved fast. So you're like, oh, an army's coming. Oh, they're here. All right, we surrender. Seems so simple, but no one was doing it. And Philip had this young son by the name of Alexander. Believe it or not, at a young age, Alexander, he did not show any kind of prowess towards combat. Like, he was into the arts and singing and painting. And so he thought, well, since he's not going to be a soldier, I'm going to make him very sophisticated, and I'm going to hire him a private tutor. So he hires a tutor for him named Aristotle. Now imagine, Aristotle is your private tutor. Not bad. I had Mrs. Lautzenheiser in 5th grade. This guy had Aristotle. He's Alexander the Great. I'm Jason Baugh. Do you want to know what happened to Aristotle's face right here? On this statue, it got chipped, and it's just missing. Not nearly as cool of a story, and I'm so sorry about that. But here's why Aristotle's important. Here's why you got to understand this. Because Aristotle's Greek, and Aristotle believes that the Greek culture is the most superior culture that man has ever seen, and the most sophisticated and the most important, and we call this humanism. It's the rise of man over God, or in his case, gods, lowercase g. You remember the Greek gods and all those cool stories? Aristotle believed that man was above that. And so at a very young age, it is put in the mind of Alexander that Greek culture is the superior culture and that the world needs to be familiar with it. That's going to be important later. And so as Alexander grows older, he is inundated with the idea that Greek is superior, hence Hellenism, means the spread of Greek culture. And then on top of that, he's around the most sophisticated army and soldiers the world has ever seen. What a deadly combination. Philip II did great till he died. And Philip II dies history kind of argues with how he dies. He's assassinated. We all understand that. 336 BC is when he's assassinated. Most historians land on that he was stabbed to death by his bodyguards. But either way, what's important for us to know is that age 20, Alexander the Great takes over as king of Macedonia with the most sophisticated army in the world, an idea in his mind that the Greek Empire is far superior, and all the confidence of a youth and the energy of a youth. Some of you start yawning by 7:15 p.m. because you're not young. Here's a picture of Alexander the Great, in case you care. This is a sculpture, and here is an artist's rendition of what they think he would look like right now. And I know that some of you ladies are like, oh, he's so handsome. None of you talk like that. But I know that some of you are thinking that because he is handsome in this. And I'll say this. I'm going to call shenanigans on it, because if you look at the actual things that were made by historians, the paintings that were there that saw him with their own eyes, here's what they said he looked like. This is the equivalent, ladies, of a Snapchat filter. Now, I know he doesn't have puppy dog ears or a tongue that sticks out. Let's go back to the previous slide. And let's go back to the actual slide. Snapchat filter. Alexander the Great takes this army that is not a big army, but it is a fast army. It is a deadly army. And this is going to be important. In 12 and a half years, which is also really interesting because 12 is the number of man in Scripture, but that's a side note. There's echoes. In 12 and a half years, he conquers the entire ancient world, which is wild. Here's a map of every area that he covered. Map time. If it's your first time here, that song, you have no idea what it means. Wow, somebody sang it back. Thank you. So this is going to be important for a couple of reasons. I need you to see that he comes out of the west, and he goes east, and then he goes north, then he goes south. And so if you'll notice, this is, at the time, the entire ancient world. The fact that he was able to conquer Egypt as well, like he's conquering all of these areas, is pretty amazing. And this is in 12 and a half years. Like, this is way before Uber. It's before Tesla. Like, has anybody ever driven to Florida with your family before and it's like a 12-hour drive? How long does that feel? My goodness. This guy not only covered all this territory in 12 and a half years, but he defeated all of the territory. So imagine he had to stop at each place where they have these, I don't even know what those swords are called. Pirates use them, the Tampa Bay Buccaneer swords. Anyways, wherever those things are, what are they called? Huh? I have no idea what you're saying. A cutlass? I have never heard that in my whole life. I think there's a car called a cutlass. Interesting. All right. This is an interactive show. Yeah. But anyway, so not only the fact that he was able to cover this much land in 12 and a half years, but the fact that he would stop at each place where there is a cutlass on the map, he was able to win battles as well, which is pretty amazing. Now, why are we spending so much time talking about Alexander the Great? This is supposed to be a Christmas series. Well, it's two purposes. One, we're going to wrap up in just a minute with Greece and talk about how God used the Greek Empire to create the fullness of time for the Messiah to show up. But also, I want to show you that God already had this all mapped out ahead of time and had it declared through Daniel. So let me take you back in time. Let's get in the DeLorean and go 500 years prior to this event. And you're going to see mapped out in the Word of God is exactly what was going to happen. Daniel 7, 2 through 6. Daniel has a vision. 500 years earlier, listen to this. In my vision at night, I looked, and there before me were 4 winds of heaven churning up. How many winds? 4. You said 7. That's bad math. 4. Now, no one's going to ever yell out. I know. It's okay. I went to California public school, so I'm with you, girl. 4 winds of heaven. We're going to put that in our pocket and save that later. You'll see why. of heaven churning up the great sea. 4 great beasts, each from others, came out of the sea. The first was like a lion, and it had the wings of an eagle. I watched until its wings were torn off, and it was lifted from the ground so that it stood on 2 feet like a human being, and the mind of a human was given to it. It's kind of creepy. And there before me was a second beast, which stood like a bear. It raised up on each of its sides, had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. It was told, "Get up and eat your fill of flesh." You think you have bad dreams. After that, I looked, and there before me was another beast, one that looked like a leopard, and on its back was 4 wings like those of a bird. The beast had 4 heads, there's that number again, 4, and it was given authority to rule. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. There was a lot of information in a couple of verses, and I'm a visual learner. I got your back. ChatGPT came up with a graphic of what this would have looked like according to Scripture, and check it out. It's my favorite slide. Yes. 4 beasts. And I could have spent literally our entire time today just breaking down this slide, but I'm going to give you kind of an overview of it. So the very first one here, 500 years before, is a lion with wings. Guess what the symbol of the Babylonian Empire was? A lion. Guess what they put on the lion in all of their architecture? Wings. Then it's taken over by a bear. And the one thing that doesn't make this perfect, but it kind of is that it's off kilter a little bit. And did you just get a picture of me doing that? Terrible. But anyways, it's off kiltered a little bit. And the reason is because we talked about this last week. It's a joint kingdom, the Medes and the Persians, Medo-Persia. So it's 2, but the Persian part was way more stronger than the Medes. So it's off kiltered a little bit. And I could go into the rest of it, but here's the thing, is that the third one that would eventually take over after that is a leopard with wings. What kind of army did Alexander the Great have? Alexander the Great had a fast army, not a strong army, not a powerful army, but a fast army. What's faster than a leopard with wings? And then this last one, believe it or not, is there's under some discrepancy, but 90 to 95% of all theologians fall on that this is the Roman Empire, which takes over after Greece. So Alexander conquers the entire world, ancient world. Then he makes a mistake. He dies. That'll disrupt your plans quickly. In fact, he dies at either 32 or 33 years old, depending upon when you think he was born. And you're like, well, what did he do? He just died. Like, that's not a mistake. He died without a succession plan of any kind. In fact, the only thing they had was one time he said, and it was documented by a scribe, give it to the strong. It's like, what do you want us to do when you die? Well, you don't have any kids. You don't have any, like, vice president. What do you want me to do? Give it to the strong? Okay. Then he dies. Now, he does die with one baby in utero. That means in belly. But you can't have a baby in utero take over a kingdom. What are you going to do, right? So they decide that they are going to give it to the strong until the baby comes of age, and they're going to split it up amongst 4 generals that will each rule over a different province. We have the map here, if you would like to see it. Map time. That one's a little blurry. It's not your eyes, for those of you 55 plus. But this is going to show you the names and the areas of the 4. Now, I know what you're thinking. Man, whoever that yellow person is, they got a lot to do. It's basically based on population and wealth, split evenly amongst 4 people. But here's why this is important. Remember that number I had you put in your pocket a little while ago? How many wins? Okay, so now let's go over to Daniel 8, which is his next vision, 500 years earlier. And he says this, I looked up, and there before me was a ram with 2 horns standing beside the canal, and the horns were long. One of the horns was longer, but grew up later. I watched them as the ram charged towards the west from the north and the south. No animal could stand against it, and none could rescue it from its power. It did as it pleased and became great. And suddenly, and as I was thinking about this, suddenly a goat with a prominent horn between its eyes came from the west. That sounds like a unicorn to me. Came from the west, crossing the whole earth without touching the ground. It came towards the two-horned ram I had seen standing beside the canal and charged it at great rage. I saw it attack the ram furiously, so two horns, Medo-Persia. I saw it attack the ram furiously, striking the ram with and shattering its two horns. The ram was powerless to stand against it. The goat knocked it to the ground and trampled on it, and none could rescue the ram from its power. Listen to this, lean in. The goat became very great, but at the height of its power, the large horn was broken off, and in its place, 4 prominent horns grew toward the 4 winds of heaven. Centuries earlier, all the way that God mapped it out. Why is this important to you and I? Because the Word of God is there to prepare us, not to scare us. So some of you are like, how's the world going to end, man? Everything is going terrible. The government is failing us. And you read Revelation? Why are we scared? Why do you and I, whenever we have a moment where God doesn't answer a prayer the way we think He should, at the timeline we think He should, do we think that He is absent? Why do you and I sometimes have this tendency of thinking, why do all these bad things keep happening to me? Why am I being ostracized for standing up for what's right? Why am I all of these difficult things happening when one of the very few last phrases Jesus said is, in this world you will have trouble. But take heart, for I have overcome the world. Why do we seek wisdom and guidance from everything else other than the Word of God when it's all mapped out by a God who's not bound by time? I'm going to talk to the late 80s, early 90s kids for a second. You and I, we see our life like the original Super Mario Brothers. It's very linear, and we don't know what's coming on the next screen till you're there, right? And once you pass it, like, you can't go back. So you have no idea what I'm talking about. But some of you, like, that's deep. Troy just got saved. But there's not a linear relationship with God. It's not. We think we grow towards God in a linear way, but that's not how it works. God is not bound by time. Last week we talked about the demonic forces that were sent to Persia. Why? Because if God could use Persia to wipe out the line of David, He could take out the Messiah before He was ever born. And so I told you about when a chief demon went to Persia to try to influence Persia, and God sent chief angels to battle them. Do you remember that? It was 2 weeks ago. I left this part out on purpose, but I'm going to give it to you now. Listen to what He tells Daniel. So he said, this is the angel, do you know why I have come to you? Soon I will return to fight against the prince of Persia, and when I go, the prince of Greece will come. So even while Persia's in power, the angel is already telling Daniel, like, I'm fighting this demon right now over this territory, but as soon as he's done, I got to go head to Greece because they're next. Satan's already there trying to work things behind the scenes and stir things up. The very last thing of Daniel is I want to just show you this. Again, 500 years before Alexander's kingdom is split up into 4. Listen, it says this, Daniel 11, verse 2. Now then, I tell you the truth. 3 more kings will arise in Persia, and then a 4th who will be far richer than the others. So he already said how many kings you're going to have in Persia. When he has gained great power by his wealth, he will stir up everyone against the kingdom of Greece. Then a mighty king will arise, who will rule with great power and do as he pleases. As he has arisen, his empire will be broken up and parceled out towards the 4 winds of heaven. It will not go to his descendants, nor will it have the power he exercised, because his empire will be rooted up and given to others. that's exactly what happens. See, the problem is with man is once man has power, man doesn't want to just give that up freely. And so remember that baby that was in utero that they were holding it for? They slaughtered it. And the mom. And everyone else who could have some sort of lineage to the throne. So just like Daniel said, it will not go to his descendants. So, for those of you that are note takers and you're like, man, I need some notes, give me some notes. So far, you just gave me a really cool graphic of some creepy looking beasts. I need some notes. I got your notes. Are you ready? Get your pen ready. Work out that carpal tunnel. Get it ready. You ready? 4 ways that God used the Hellenistic Empire. There's 4 ways. And then we're going to transition briefly to Rome and talk about the ways that God used the Roman Empire. How did God use the Hellenistic Empire? 1, Greek became the universal language of the world. Don't sleep on how important this is. Because Alexander the Great was able to conquer the entire world, and because he was so obsessed with Greek culture, a.k.a. Hellenism, everywhere he went, not only did he name a city after himself. You know how many cities are Alexandria? My goodness. But not only did he do that, but he also forced Greek culture upon them. If you didn't speak Greek, they called you a savage. So everybody wanted to learn Greek. I don't want to be a savage. And so now we have one universal language. How convenient that when the fullness of time comes, for the first time in human history, we have everyone who can communicate with each other through one language. Oh, how convenient that when the fullness of time came, as people are following the way, as people are talking about the Messiah, as people are talking about Torah and Old Testament, they now can all communicate with each other. The fullness of time. Number 2, shifted the world from polytheism to humanism. All those Greek gods, man. But what Aristotle did through Alexander, through Hellenism, was that now it was the rise of man. Man is the epicenter of the creation of God. Man knows better than any god. But we shifted away, and then what God used the rise of man for is point 3, humanism showed the depravity of man. It's a lot easier to worship a God that's up in the sky that you just hear stories about. But now when you elevate man over God, God is a man, and men make terrible gods. Because you are around them. You see them on their bad days. You see them when they lose their temper. You see them without makeup on. You see all of these things. And so as they rose man to prominence, then when you're around man and you see the flaws in man, then you don't have a lot of confidence in man. A lot of confidence in government. And then the 4th one, and this is arguably the most important of the 4, is the Septuagint was written. Now, this is probably a new term to most of you, which is totally fine, but if you're going to be a follower of Jesus, or as John Mark Comer calls it, an apprentice of Jesus, you need to start learning these things. Some of you can name every quarterback that has ever played for the Dallas Cowboys, and you can name how many playoff wins they have in the last 20 years on one hand. But the reality is our biblical knowledge is lacking. And then we wonder why we're so easily persuaded. The Septuagint is something we need to add to our vernacular, and it is the Greek translation of the Old Testament. That's what it means. Now, this is huge, because for the first time in human history, everybody's speaking Greek, and now everybody can have their own copy of the Old Testament, which is big time, because now you don't have to go to a rabbi to hear a reading of it. Now you don't have to go through man to get to God. Now you have access to the Old Testament yourself, and not just Torah. This is going to be important because your Orthodox Jews don't teach about Jesus. They'll just teach about everything other. So all the prophecies and everything that's in the Old Testament about Jesus, they'll stay away from, so the people don't know. You don't know what you don't know. Now we have the Septuagint, written by a dude named, well, he didn't write it. He paid for it, which is even better, named Ptolemy II from this town called Philadelphus. which should sound familiar to you Eagles fans who got whooped by the 49ers a couple weeks ago. It's like the highlight of my adult life. No. It'll be the Super Bowl. He hires 72 Hebrew translators, 6 from each of the 12 tribes of Israel. Interesting. Let's see if that carried the one. Yep, 72 to translate this thing, which is going to be crazy important because now everybody has access to all of the prophecies of the coming Messiah. So when the fullness of time shows up, they know what to look for. So imagine this tension is being built. You have all of these years of silence. You see the depravity of man. You see all of these things happening, and the tension and the tension and the tension. And then they start to hear about this heretic baptizer in the Judean desert with the spirit of Elijah that is saying the Messiah is here. A few things happen between the Greek and the Roman Empire. Again, this was supposed to be 2 weeks of a message squeezed into one. I encourage you on your own to read about the Maccabean revolt, to read about the Essenes, but we're going to kind of jump ahead to the Roman government, and we're going to talk just very briefly about it because the Roman government is the backdrop of the whole New Testament. So a lot of the Roman things and the Roman Empire is built into the New Testament. But here's what you need to know about the Roman Empire. It started off as a small republic, and then this guy by the name of General Pompey, here's a picture of General Pompey. He captures Jerusalem in 63 BC. He sets up what's called the Decapolis, which is just 10 major cities. Thus, Rome transitions from a republic to an empire. And they grow into power. And here's how I want us to end our time today, is I want to briefly go through the 4 major ways that God used the Roman Empire now to set up the fullness of time. I hope you're with me. If you hate history, you'll never be back. The first way that God used the Roman Empire is that the Roman Empire brought world peace. The Roman Empire, for all of its faults, were fantastic at governing a country. Fantastic. No, by the way, no national debt. It's called the Pax Romana, which is really Latin for Roman peace. And this ushers in 200 years, which will be also eclipsing the entire earthly life of Jesus, of peace. This is huge. They can't even have 2 years of peace in the ancient world or today. But you have 200 years of peace. Why is this important? You know what happens during times of peace? Nothing. Men aren't off to war so they can be home leading their families. You're not trying to fundraise and get debt and fund a war. And also people have a lot more free time to sit and listen to the teachings of a rabbi from Nazareth. Pax Romana, 200 years of world peace happens. The second one is the road system. The Romans built a road system called the Roman Road. And this is going to be important. 250,000 miles of roads. 50,000 of those 250,000 are actually paved with stone. Now, from Gallatin to here this morning, I hit 4 potholes. These roads are still in existence, most of them. Now, why is that important to have a road system? Because if you have a Messiah, people need to talk about it. This is way before Twitter or X, which will always be Twitter to me. But it's way before that. And so you had to have through word of mouth. And so before, the terrain to get to the next city, to get to the next people was pretty severe. So most people just stayed isolated. But now we have all these Roman roads, which, by the way, are also protected by the Roman government and soldiers. So the first time in human history, it's actually a safe way to travel. Way safer than the Silk Road. They can actually travel and not have to worry about getting jumped. What a perfect opportunity for Jesus, for the disciples, for later Paul to travel and talk freely about Messiah. The third one is synagogues. Remember that kid I told you about earlier that said baby lion? He also called this a synagogue. And I laughed. So for the rest of the semester, we had baby lion and synagogue. Synagogues are huge because the Romans really didn't care about oppressing people religiously. They really didn't, because they wanted to be considered a sophisticated society that allowed all of these multiple ways to God. And so they didn't care. Just pay taxes, give to Caesar what is Caesar's. And now you have synagogues all over the place. It's like Dollar Generals, man. They're all over the place and in the weirdest places. I'll be lost driving in the middle of nowhere, and I'm like, bro, there's a Dollar General. It's a synagogue. What a perfect opportunity for Jesus to travel freely on paved roads protected by the Roman government and walk into synagogues and teach freely. The fullness of time. The very last way is the rise of man-made legalism, and this could be a sermon on its own. But you have three different sects of the Roman Empire. It's S-E-C-T-S, calm down. Three different sects of Christianity in the Roman Empire. The Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the Essenes. And basically this is man-made legalism. So in the law, you had 613 commands. You probably just thought there was 10. Well, 613. But in addition to that, the man-made categories, they added 1,500 man-made laws on top of the laws from God. Sounds like something man does, right? Religion gets in and adds all of these do's and don'ts that are not from God. Shots fired. But what happens is that God uses this because people are burdened with having to constantly act like they're perfect and living up to this standard that is impossible. And so they lose their faith in man. They become disgruntled with organized man-made religion, and they're desperate for a Messiah. They're desperate for someone that says you no longer have to keep the law because I am here to pay for your portion. I want to end it with this question. Then we'll end it back with Galatians 4:4. Last week, 2 weeks ago, I asked this question: why didn't God send Jesus immediately after the original sin in the Garden of Eden? Like Adam and Eve sin, I'll send Jesus, and then you'll go. If you want to know the answer to that, you're going to have to be one of 50 people to go back and watch it on YouTube. There's a lot of views on our YouTube channel, like I think 56, 57, Tyler, come on, 58, moving on up. All right, so some of you have no idea what that is either. But if you want to hear that, you're going to have to go back and listen to that. But I'm going to ask you the opposite side. So before it was, why didn't Jesus come a long time ago? Now this question this week is, why didn't he just wait a little bit longer and send Jesus now so that we can at least record it and have proof? Right? You sent him, we couldn't even record it. Like, yeah, we had scribes. But I want audio, video, HD if you don't mind. Because time doesn't matter to God. Why didn't you just wait a little bit? And this week I was kind of just letting this message marinate and kind of trying to figure out a way to land it. And I was thinking about my wife. And this week we celebrated 18 years of marriage. Come on. The best 18 years of her life. When she was a little girl, she was dreaming of having a husband with a members-only jacket. Let's go. But seriously, I don't have any proof that she loves me. I really don't. If I could control human behavior, it wouldn't be love. And I really started to think about, I don't know for sure that she loves me. I don't have proof, but what I do have are signs, the words she says, her actions. In fact, she comes home every night. And I really felt God kind of keep this phrase going in my mind of, for it to be love, there always has to be an element of faith. Because if there's proof, then there's control. And if there's control, Is it really love? There's signs that my wife loves me. And so I don't know why God sent Jesus before we could record him. But something that we're going to all have to deal with at some point in time is this idea that there will always be an element of faith to believe in the love of God. It's built in. But what we're going to have to do is look at the signs, look at the evidence, and look at the people. And God can show you that he loves you through other people. God can show you that he loves you through his faithfulness. God can show you that he loves you through his word. But there will always be an element of faith. That's what love is. Let's end it with the verse that we started this whole thing with. Galatians 4:4-5. This is what Christmas is about. But when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law, so that we might receive adoption as sons. Thank you so much for watching this video. It truly is an honor to be able to spend a little bit of time with you. I want to encourage you, if you want to keep up with all of the latest things going on at Centerpoint Church, you can subscribe to this channel. You can hit that bell for alerts so that you won't miss anything. And most importantly, if this impacted you in any way, I want to hear about it. We want to celebrate with you. We want to serve you. So if you go to centerpointtn.com, click on Contact Us, and we can't wait to get connected with you.